Welcome back to the second installment of our three-part series in collaboration with the American Society of the University of Haifa. My name is Brian Friedman with Israel Investment Advisors, and this session will feature Amir Walensky. Last session, we had Professor Ayelet Gilboa, an archaeologist from the University of Haifa, and we just sent out a few minutes ago a recording of last week's session for you to either rewatch because it was so riveting or to share with your friends. Today, we're going to have senior guide Amir Walensky from the Hecht Museum at the University of Haifa. And next week, our final installment will bring us from the ancient world to the modern world, where we're going to speak with Professor Emeritus Benjamin Ben-Tal, an economist and economics professor at the University of Haifa, where we're going to talk more about the modern economic miracle that is Israel. Let me just for a minute introduce who Israel Investment Advisors is. We, since 2010, have been the premier way for Americans to invest in the Israeli stock market. We translate our knowledge and expertise in the Israeli economy into long-term growth for our clients. And we manage portfolios for individuals, foundations, and endowments with our feature fund, the Israel Investment Fund, invested in the Israeli stock market. And we are very proud to partner with the American Society of the University of Haifa. The goal of this series is to showcase the University of Haifa. Many Americans are, of course, familiar with Hebrew University in Jerusalem, the Technion, also in Haifa, but fewer are aware of the vast resources that are available at the University of Haifa in the beautiful Carmel, overlooking the ocean. And today we're in for a real treat with Amir. Amir Walensky is the senior curator and senior guide at the Hecht Museum. He himself is a marine archaeologist. In fact, he told me that he is an experienced deep sea diver, has experience as an underwater marine archaeologist, and 20 years of experience in the field of archaeology, in particular underwater archaeology. Once again, I'm Brian Friedman. I'm the president and the portfolio manager of the Israel Investment Fund, and we're very pleased to introduce Amir at the University of Haifa at the Hecht Museum. You're in for a real treat as he takes us on a tour of their amazing collection. Amir, thank you.
Okay, Boker Tov, everybody. Boker Tov, Kulam. I'm really happy to be here in the Hecht Museum in the University of Haifa. And let me share my screen with you. Okie dokie. So I'm talking to you from the University of Haifa, from the Hecht Museum. And there are several things that I would like to do with you today. First, I would like to introduce you to our museum here in the university. Unfortunately, we could benefit from more people that will know about this. Not enough people do know about the museum, so I will do that today. Another thing is that I wanted to share with you the story of Dr. Hecht, the founder of the museum. I'll give you a virtual tour of the museum, and then hopefully the talk today will focus on the ancient shipwreck from Ma'agan Mikhael, one of the oldest shipwrecks in the world. So let's start. Let's see, how do I do this? Yeah, okay. So this is what you can see now is the campus of the University of Haifa. The University of Haifa is located on the Carmel, and from that magnificent location, of course, we can see the ports of Haifa. So the University of Haifa, and they always had a very strong connection to the sea, which I think is one of the threads of this talk today. This is Dr. Hecht, Dr. Reuven Hecht, the founder of the museum. And first, I would like to talk about how the museum came to be. And Dr. Hecht is a very unique person that he was also a collector. Dr. Hecht actually donated his private collection to the University of Haifa. He actually had two collections. One, an archaeological collection telling the story of ancient Israel, and the other, an contemporary art collection, which he also donated to the University of Haifa. So the museum was opened in 1984 with those two collections of Dr. Hecht. It wasn't only the collection, it was also his vision and his funds. But let's go back to Hecht's history in Europe, his childhood. Hecht grew up to a Jewish Swiss family. This is a photograph of the Hecht family in the late 1800s. His family was in the business of maritime shipping of grain. They had several companies located in, well, the center was in Basel, Switzerland. As far as his Jewish identity, Hecht grew up not knowing that he was Jewish. He actually found out that he was Jewish from, not from his family, but from his first grade teacher who told him that he was Jewish. He was shocked, surprised, and from that on, he started a self-voyage or search to learn what it is to be Jewish. Of course, being in Basel at the time gave him this special opportunity, and soon he became an enthusiastic Zionist, and later on also a follower of Jabotinsky, which evolved into, when he came to Israel, being a personal friend and advisor of Menachem Begin. Of course, being associated with the revisionists prevented him from making Aliyah. He had to wait until the state of Israel was established. When he came here, he chose to come to Haifa. And why to Haifa? Because here Hecht built our national granary, this white building that you see here, which he named Dagon, after the local god of grain, is our national granary. What do I mean saying that this is our national granary? Most of the grain that we consume here in Israel, since almost the establishment of the state, is actually imported to Israel through the port of Haifa. Ships bring the grain here, and the factory of Hecht, Dagon, is downloading the grain from the ships and then distributing them all over the country. So this is actually the only factory of this kind in Israel, and this is, literally speaking, the bread supply to Israel since almost the early days of the state, the early 50s. So this was Hecht's business, but from a very young age, he also had a great interest in Jewish history, and he read a lot. He was very curious. But how can you touch Israel from being in Europe? He started a small collection of items like this menorah, like this oil lamp, which he was looking specifically to items that would reflect on the ancient tie of the Jews to their historical homeland, the land of Israel. Along the years, this collection has evolved into thousands of items which he donated to the University of Haifa, and the museum was initially opened in 1984. So this is where we start our virtual tour in the museum. Hecht actually picked, what you see here is a group of wine bottles, and Hecht actually picked those wine bottles to be the icon, the logo of the museum. You can see the hay and surrounding this wine bottle, which we call lagin. He picked this because this was a uniquely Jewish creation, which no other culture had, and this is why Hecht this is why Hecht picked this item as the logo of the museum. In the upper right corner of my screen, you can see a unique lagin with the inscription in ancient Hebrew, which says Yehazyahu yein khachal. And you see that this is a unique bottle of wine, and there are some options or arguments as to the translation of that inscription in ancient Hebrew. You see that I actually wrote khachal, black, wine of Yehazyahu. So Yehazyahu, there's no argument about this. This bottle belonged to Yehazyahu, which was probably a winemaker. But what's the meaning of yein khachal? Is it blue wine, or actually khachal in ancient Hebrew actually means black, not blue? Or is it a place, maybe a winery near Hebron, which was named khachal or khachil? So this is a very interesting question. However, as I said, Hecht chose this unique vessel to be the logo of the Hecht Museum. This is how the entrance to our museum looks like. Each room is a different exhibit. I chose some highlights for you, which I hope you'll find interesting. When you actually enter the museum, you see those two very interesting coffins, which we call anthropoids. There were 50 of them that were found in southern Israel. About 50, each one different. They look Egyptian. I think you agree that they look Egyptian, but they're actually not Egyptian. They're, they were in Egyptian style, but they were locally made. They're dated to the 15th century BCE, which makes them 3,500 years old. Inside those coffins, there were a lot of luxury items that were found, probably the possessions of the deceased, which were hoping to take them to the next step. If you're interested in what was happening here in the 15th century BCE, at that time, this is several hundred years before the Exodus. This is a time of the Egyptian empire at its peak, and Israel is under the Egyptian empire. And so the local culture is actually an Egyptian one, and this reflects very strongly in those coffins, which we call anthropoids, because they're shaped in the shape of the human body, which is of course an Egyptian tradition. We move on to the next room, and here we have this magnificent mosaic floor from a synagogue in Beit-Shan. Why did the archaeologists actually Beit-Shan? Let me start with Beit-Shan. Beit-Shan was a major city in the Jordan Valley. It was destroyed in a big earthquake, and you can see the damage on this mosaic floor. Why did the archaeologists think that this is actually a floor of a synagogue? Well, this is because here in the middle, we can see the 7-candle menorah, which is probably the oldest Jewish symbol that we know. This, of course, represents an actual menorah, which stood in the temple in Jerusalem. And I'm sure all of you who visited Rome remember Titus and his legionnaires, right, carrying the menorah on their shoulders. And if you look closely, above the menorah, which still appears, I think, in almost every temple or synagogue, at the symbolic menorah, you can read the word shalom above the menorah. And for me, the ability to read Hebrew actually gives me something like a time tunnel, because with the Hebrew, you really have a window for ancient times. So let us continue. I don't know if you observed this, but there's another inscription here on the floor. This is, I will not ask you to read this, Brian, because this is actually not Hebrew. This is, can you read this, Brian? This is Aramaic, okay? And
Thanks
another
for not putting
problem,
me on the spot.
another problem we have, that's okay. Another problem, I explain why it's hard, because we're very used to our conventions, right? You read English from left to right, you read Hebrew from right to left. We have punctuations, you have nothing of this here. The conventions are very different. The words are connected, okay? There's no punctuation, there's no otiyot sofiot, okay? There's no space bar. So it's very hard to read, but we can still make an effort and try. So let's try. So we start from the upper right corner. It says dachir, okay? That's in Aramaic. In Aramaic, I didn't say. Aramaic came from Babylonia, what Iraq is today. The first Shavei Zion that came back from Babylonia, from the exile, brought with them the Aramaic. And actually, during the Second Temple period, the Aramaic is the spoken language here. And indeed, we know a lot of the rabbinical literature was written in Aramaic. And of course, all of you know the Haggadah for Pesach and the Zkor, okay? A lot of the prayers are also written in Aramaic. So we started with the first word. It says dachir. We'll translate it later, okay? And then we move to the bottom. It says latav, dachir latav, zachur latov. And then the third word, omana, the artist. And then we move to the left upper part, de avad. De avad in Aramaic means that worked. Hada, that means ze in Hebrew, this. And the last word in the bottom, avidata. With a little spelling mistakes, this actually means avodah, okay, job or project. So if we put everything together, what we have here is zachur latov ha'oman she'asa et ha'avodah azo. May he be remembered, the artist who created this floor. Why do we have this spelling mistake in the last word? Probably because in that period, people living here already didn't notice between the two sounds of the Ain and the Aleph. Another very interesting exhibit, we move on, is this exhibit dedicated to illness and healing in antiquity. Here, one example, you see this very interesting book by Dioscorides, the Greek doctor, De Materia Medica, maybe one of the earliest pharmacological books of medicine, containing 600 recipes for medicine, mainly made out of plants. This was a manuscript. This was a bestseller, okay, you might say. We have a lot of copies of this. This specific copy from the rare collection, or the rare books collection of the University of Haifa, was created in the 6th century, initially written in Greek. Another interesting, we move on to another exhibit. another collection that Hecht collected, and this is the seal collection. We have one of the largest seal collections of officials from the Kingdom of Judea. Most of them, as you see the example in front on your screen, were written in ancient Hebrew. Okay, I put on the left side, I put the alphabet in ancient Hebrew. This is pretty easy to decipher. This one says Le Ma'adana Bat HaMelech. So this was a lady, her name was Ma'adana. We don't know about her anything from the Bible or other sources. However, she was a high official in the Judean court, and she chose the harp of David as her icon, which also was adapted by the state of Israel. The modern state of Israel chose the same or took the same symbol and put it on the half shekel coin. Another very interesting collection that we have is the Hecht coin collection. Actually, one of the first items in his collection were coins. This is the one that you see now on your screen, is a silver shekel from the period of the Great Revolt. Of course, minting coins is something done by the king or by the sovereign. So when the revolt against the Roman erupted in the year 66, the Jewish government of Jerusalem started minting its own coins to show the independence to be. So each one also says, this one you see says Yerushalayim Kadesha, Yerushalayim Kadesha. Some says to the redemption, Legeulat Yerushalayim. Okay, and they count the years of the revolt, starting a new count. Of course, we all know that the revolt failed and actually ended up catastrophically as far as the Jews, with the destruction of Jerusalem, Titus burning down Jerusalem. However, here again, the state of Israel chose to use those ancient symbols on our modern coins. Here you see the symbol. I didn't say this. This is a symbol of what we call the three pomegranates, and you see it on the lira coin to my left.
Amir?
Yes.
Quick question. Those coins from the revolt period, which was only 3 or 4 years, how rare are those coins, or how easy are they to find? And before you answer, let me just remind everybody that if you want to ask questions, type it into the Q&A on the Zoom app. Sorry, go ahead.
Brian, thank you for your question. I love questions, and this is indeed a great question. Hecht was, of course, mostly interested in the rare coins and the ones that had a specific connection to the Jewish history. So I think you have some background on coins, because indeed those coins are very rare, very hard to find. They were minted in a very small scale and only for 4 years. So they're very hard to find on the market, and they usually get a very good price. But Hecht was successful in obtaining those shekels from the Great Revolt. So we're very lucky to have them and to be able to exhibit them to the public. Moving on, we also have an art wing. The art wing, first of all, I have to apologize. I'm an archaeologist, so the art tour will be pretty brief, but still we have a lot of interesting things to show you here. Hecht was also a great lover of contemporary art, and the Hecht collection, the Hecht art collection had, as being a private collection, had several focuses. So Hecht, of course, at that time, Hecht's childhood in Europe, Paris is actually the capital of contemporary art. So one of the focuses of his collection is the Barbizon school, one of the schools that came before the Impressionists and had a great impact on the Impressionist movement. Here you see the example of Josef Israels that was nicknamed the Jewish Rembrandt. So this is Joseph Israel from the Barbizon school. Of course, the Impressionists are a great focus of his collection. Here you see the example of a painting by Claude Monet. But I think that the highlight of our tour in the Hecht art collection is this piece that you see here. This was made by the Jewish artist from Italian origin, Amadeo Modigliani, and he was part of what the French called l'École de Paris, meaning a group of artists, many of them Jewish, that came to Paris, but they weren't French, so they called them l'École de Paris. The story about this specific Modigliani is that Hecht bought this for a bargain price because initially they weren't sure that this is an authentic Modigliani, but when he sent this to frame, there was a very interesting discovery. They found another portrait on the back side. We all know the stories about the poor artists that couldn't afford to buy the canvas and so on. But here you see an actual example. You could say that Hecht got two in the price of one, right? On the back, we see another portrait. And if you look very closely, you might find an even third, you see it upside down, yeah, an even third portrait on the bottom. There was a research on this work of Modigliani found out that this is actually Maud Barnett, a known figure among the circles of artists at this time, the Bohemian community of Paris. Another thing, of course, that highly interested Hecht, of course, was artists like Hermann Struck that created iconic figures, iconic Zionistic figures. So on the right, you see Hermann Struck, born in Austria in 1922. He came here to Haifa, so this is another connection to Hecht. And of course, he's responsible for this iconic portrait, several portraits of Theodor Herzl. Another thing that we have here in the art wing, another very interesting collection, is the Gez collection. Gez was a Swiss collector who collected Jewish artists that perished in the Holocaust. We have part of his collection here in the University of Haifa. Another big part of his collection you can see in Geneva. I just brought one of my favorite examples from this, an artist. I'm sure none of you heard about Natalie Kramer, one of those artists, Jewish artists that Gez collected, created this series of this series of portraits. I just chose one. On one hand, Amy last time asked me why do I like this portrait, and I think I like it because on one hand it's very unusual, because this style of Natalie Kramer. On the one hand, it looks very flat and simple, almost naive, but on the other hand, you could really feel that you know this lady playing cards. You can see her inside the world. So on one hand looks very simple. On the other hand, I think you can get a glimpse of her complex identity or personality in that special style of Natalie Kramer. And before we get to the ship, just another interesting feature that we have here in the museum. We have this magnificent organ from the 19th century. It's a mechanical pipe organ. You can see the pipes from metal and wooden. This is originally from this is actually two organs that were put together, two organs from the 19th century that were put together by this guy, Gidon Shamir. Here you see him inside in the belly of the monster, in the belly of the organ. This is all mechanical, and he actually came with this idea of building an organ in the museum, which Hecht accepted gladly, and he created this magnificent instrument which we enjoy as often as possible. You don't have as many organ players as piano players, but still we have a lot of recitals, and we enjoy this magnificent instrument here in the Hecht Museum.
Amir,
so,
one
yes.
of the participants asked, are the Jewish artists that you featured recognized for their talents outside the Jewish community? And I think he was referring to some of these that perished in the Holocaust.
Okay, so I think I'm not an expert on the Gez collection. If this was what of course Amadeo Modigliani is, we all know, and I could bring many more examples like Chaim Soutine and Camille Pizarro. But as far as the Gez collection, I think the idea of the collector was to make those people, they weren't known at all, and I think the idea was to make them, to give them the highlight that they deserve, and they would probably would have had if not the Holocaust. So I think this was the idea behind the Gez collection, as far as I understand. So now we move on to the main subject of our talk today, and this is, you can also see it behind me. We call it the Ma'agan Ship, the Ma'agan Mikhael Ship, and this is actually a shipwreck, one of the oldest shipwrecks in the world. It was dated to 400 BCE, which makes it a 2,400 years old ship. The ship was excavated by our local department for, it is called Maritime Civilizations. This was established by the late professors Linder and Rabban. And this is unique in Haifa, and also one of the only departments. This is unique in Israel, and also one of the only departments that do maritime archaeology in the world. It was also one of the first ones. This is Ma'agan Mikhael is actually one of over 50 vessels that were excavated by the Department of Maritime Civilization. I'm myself a graduate of this program. Here you can see the Ma'agan Mikhael shore. Ma'agan Mikhael is a kibbutz near Zichron Yaakov. Okay, you can see the gefilte fish ponds in the back, right? We all love gefilte fish. And in the front, we can see the shore where the ship was initially discovered by Ami Eshel, a kibbutz member, in 1983. a major storm in the winter of 1983 shifted some sand, and so pieces of the ship was first discovered. And this guy, Ami Eshel from Kibbutz Ma'agan Mikhael, was diving there and he discovered the ship. He called in the archaeologists, and this is how this whole project started. So let's, here you see the divers excavating the ship. And so let me stop for a minute and talk about underwater excavation, okay? Which is, I think, a little unusual and interesting. So first of all, of course, you have to be able, you have to dive. In order to be a marine archaeologist, you have to dive, okay? You also have to, you need a lot of respect. You need to have a lot of respect to the ocean. It's not like the regular archaeology. You have to bear in mind the sea conditions. You cannot work in the winter. You have to, you need a good visibility, and of course, so let me tell you how we do this. Here, when you excavate under the sea, what we actually do is we use an instrument that we call a dredger. A dredger was invented actually to clean up ports from sand and debris. We use it to actually suck the sand. It's like a huge vacuum cleaner, but very, very extremely strong. And we actually create a crater on the sea, revealing the artifact. So over here on the right, you can see the diver revealing the remains of a vessel, not the Ma'agan Mikhael, a different ship. And here in the middle, you can see another diver sucking up the sand from an ancient cooking pot. So this is just to share with you some of the challenges doing marine archaeology.
Amir?
Yes.
One of the participants was wondering if you could give a little bit of background to one of the archaeologists you mentioned, Avner Rabban.
Yes. Yes, let's move on to the site. I was actually a student. I had the honor to be a student of Avner Rabban. Avner Rabban is from Kibbutz Ramat David, okay? As a soldier, he was serving in the Marine, he was a Marine SEAL, okay? And he was also very interested. He was an all-rounder. He was very interested in many different fields, especially marine archaeology, but also art and geography and geology, marine geology. And so he, together with Linder, actually established this school, which they called the Maritime Civilization. And the concept was that, you know, whoever sails to sea is a part of a whole civilization. It's not just, and you have to see it in the aspect of the whole culture, his whole civilization and environment is a marine one. And so this was the concept of the Maritime Civilization School, which was a multidisciplinary program which was established by Avner Rabban, which was, first of all, an archaeologist, and Elisha Linder, also a kibbutznik, by the way, from Kibbutz Ma'agan Mikhael, which was more of a marine historian. Okay, so this is, yeah, we saw this already. You have to understand that the ship behind me, the Ma'agan Mikhael shipwreck, is actually, you know, it's not a very nice ship. There were bigger ships, there were nicer ships. This was a merchant vessel. It's not a royal ship. I don't know if any of you saw the Vasa in Stockholm, which is a royal ship. So what's so special about this? What's special about this? What makes this ship unique is the miracle of organic preservation. I show you, I brought you this slide. This is actually not from, of course, the Ma'agan Mikhael shipwreck, but this is the typical situation in maritime archaeology, where you actually see the cargo of the ship, but there's no ship, because the ship has disintegrated because it was a wooden craft. It didn't survive. You can actually see the print of the ship, but there's no ship. You can see the cargo, and very often the cargo, mostly pottery, survived much better than the actual ship. However, this is not the case with the Ma'agan Mikhael shipwreck. Because of the special conditions of the ship sinking, and it was buried in the sand pretty rapidly, the organic preservation of the ship is outstanding. And you don't have to take my word for it. Here in number 1, of course, this is all organic artifacts that were found on the ship. The actual hull of the ship, of course, is all wooden, but here you can actually see olive pits that were eaten. These are olives that were eaten by the crew members 2,400 years ago, okay, and still survived for so long. So, you know, I hope I convinced you that the organic preservation here is outstanding. Also, pieces of rope. Speaking of rope, this is here the wooden anchor of the Ma'agan Mikhael ship. It's actually behind me. I don't know, you probably cannot see it, but you can see it in the slides. Here you can see it when it was how it was discovered on the bottom of the sea, and divers removing parts of it. The question, of course, you might ask me, Brian, why do I think that this is the anchor of Ma'agan Mikhael ship? Because very often, you know, when we excavate in a port, we find a lot of anchors. So why do I insist that this is actually the anchor of the Ma'agan Mikhael ship? So the answer is very easy. This was found connected with the original rope, 2,400 years old, to the ship. You can see the rope here coiled very nicely, okay? As far as the wood being found in the, I said that the preservation here was outstanding, but of course the wood was very fragile. So this is why here on the right, on my right hand, on the right side of the screen, you can see this stretcher. The stretcher was built especially to carry those very fragile pieces of wood. Imagining a cookie in a cup of tea for 2,400 years, okay? So the wood survived, but it was very soft, it was very fragile, and we had to take really good care of it for it to survive. Another very interesting set of artifacts that was found on board is what we call the carpenter's toolkit. So here you see all those tools that were probably used for emergency maintenance on the high seas, like you have a spare wheel and few screwdrivers. Also, every ship had those basic tools to fix the ship. And you can see the wooden mallets, and you can see the ruler and other parts. Among the carpenter's toolkit, we found pieces of a bow drill. What do you need a bow drill for? So, of course, to make holes, to fix the ship. This is, I remind you, this is a world with no electricity. Here in the bottom, you can see this Egyptian carpenter using a bow drill to make a wonderful chair. Another very interesting, another set of artifacts that I want to discuss is the Ma'agan ship pottery. For you, it might not look very, very impressive, but you have to bear in mind that for archaeologists, pottery is very important from two reasons. One, of course, it allows us to reconstruct the daily life of the crew members, which is very interesting. You can see the oil lamps, and you can see that they're burned because they were used. You can see the actual cooking pot that was used on board, and you can see those Rhodian amphora. Amphora is a vessel that was especially made to carry wine, and of course, and sailors like wine, you know. But what they did, the Greek custom was to mix the water with wine, and of course, you can imagine that being on the high seas for several weeks, the water didn't taste that great. So, you know, adding some mitzpetel, some red wine would be a significant improvement to the taste of the water. So this is reconstructing, you know, the daily life of the sailors, but the pottery has an even more important significance from scientific point of view. It allows us to date the ship because we know that specific jars and vessels were made in different times, and it also allows us to reconstruct the course of the ship, because if we know where each item was made, we can assume that you know, these are actually stops of the ship. So let me show you this reconstructed course of the ship. We think that it was actually built in an island called Samos in Asia Minor, and then the ship sailed to Evia, to an island near Athens, and I show you I'll show you in a minute or two why we think it stopped in Evia, but then it probably stopped in Rhodes, and from there to Cyprus, and in Cyprus we were very close to Israel, right? And from Cyprus, the last stop was probably the Ma'agan Mikhael port. Why did I say that the ship stopped in Evia? Evia is an island east of Athens, Greece. I also said that this was a cargo ship. Why did I say that this was a cargo ship? Because the actual cargo, or what we found on board, was 13 tons of blue schist or slate, and the geologist helped us identify the source of the ship's cargo, and it seems that those 13 tons of stone actually came from the island Evia near the shores of Greece. But as you see on your screen, the scholars were wondering whether this is cargo or ballast. Let me explain what is ballast. Okay, a merchant ship is built to sail with cargo, full with cargo. And so what do you do when you don't have cargo? You need a minimum weight to make it stable, okay? So, and this is what we call ballast. Today, if you send a tanker, a ship tanker to Saudi Arabia to bring oil, you cannot send it empty. So what you do, you fill it up with water, with ballast water. In antiquity, each port had a pile of stones, so they would pile up the stones to balance the ship when it's sailing empty. But this, so we're not really sure whether this was just a weight on the way from Greece to here, just to balance the ship, or whether this was an actual cargo that the ship's captain was hoping to sell here in the Israeli coast. What do you do with slate? Of course, slate you can slice very easily, and this you can still see in the old world. In Europe, this of course was used to make roof tiles. But this was also a very strong evidence suggesting that the Ma'agan Mikhael shipwreck is not a local ship, but a foreign one. And this is because we don't have blue schist here in Israel. And this brings me to the last stage of this project, this research project of the Ma'agan Mikhael shipwreck. And this was building a replica of the ship. Of course, a lot of it was preserved, but still, you know, what we have behind me, you cannot take to the sea, right? So there were two main reasons to build a replica. First of all, how is a replica different from a model? Okay, so a replica is an exact replica of the actual ship. Of course, we don't know how the actual ship looked like, but this is what we call an intelligent guess of how the Ma'agan Mikhael ship looked like. And Yak Kahanov, the professor behind the preservation of the ship and the project of the replica, was also trying to reproduce the techniques that were used to build the ship. So over here on the right, you can see the beginning. This is actually the keel of the ship. And you can see Professor Kahanov here on the left, or actually on the right, with two of his helpers. And this is how it started, with the keel. And on the left here, you can see this big stove that they built to cook the wood. Why do you need to cook the wood? Apparently, the ancient technique to create those curves, the curved wood that was needed to build the ship. So what they did was cooking the wood, so the wood would be flexible enough to get the curves that were needed to build the ship of Ma'agan Mikhael. And down here you can see the work in progress. How they started with the keel in the bottom, and then gradually climbing up until they finished the replica, which took about 2 years. Here you can see the replica here in the shipyards of Haifa. So of course, after they finished building the hull of the ship, the challenge was to see whether, you know, it's a ship. You want to sail it. You don't want to sink in it, right? So first thing you do, you put it in the water. And what happens, which also happened in ancient times, is that the wood expands. And when the wood expands with first touch of the water, it actually becomes waterproof. And then after the ship was ready, they started sailing it. And this is a photograph of the replica sailing. The most exciting voyage so far was a voyage to Cyprus, which took several days. The ship had a crew of about six crew members, and it took them several weeks to conclude this voyage to Cyprus. And of course, if you'll come to Haifa, hopefully you'll be able to see the ship behind me, which is the original ship, but also the replica, which is anchoring here in the port of Haifa. So this concludes the virtual tour of the museum, and we also talked about the shipwreck from Ma'agan Mikhael and the replica. So thank you very much, and I'm open for questions.
Amir, that was fantastic. You're right. The Hecht Museum is a hidden gem, so we're very honored to be able to take this virtual tour with you. Of course, it's always more exciting to see things live and in person. You know, I have a question. Tell us a little bit about the ports 2,400 years ago. Well, obviously from the Bible, we're familiar with Jaffa,
Yeah.
But what other ports were there? And then maybe elaborate a little bit on how they accomplished their navigation at that time.
Okay, so ports and navigation. Let's start with the ports. So as you mentioned, it's a little hard, you know, it's a little, so actually Jaffa was the port of Jerusalem. We read about King Hiram, right, supplying the cedars to build the temple in Jerusalem. In the 19th century, not in biblical times, it took 2 days or 3 days to get from Jaffa to Jerusalem. So just imagining the Phoenicians bringing the cedars of Lebanon from Jaffa to Jerusalem. If we go, if north of Jaffa, we have Haifa is actually situated on the largest bay that we have along the Israeli coast. However, Haifa is, you know, from archaeological point of view, Haifa is a modern port. It actually evolved in the mid 19th century, where in Antiquity the important port of our region was actually the Akko port. Akko is the important city on the other side of the bay, and actually it was Akko was sinking and Haifa flourished, where with the steamships of the 19th century that could no longer go into the shallow Akko port, they needed the deep water port, and Haifa port supplied them with the deep water port, and therefore Haifa evolved and Akko actually sank. As far as navigation in Antiquity, of course, was based on the stars, on the astronomical elements, but the sailors mainly sailed along the coast from port to port. They tried not to sail too far away from. They tried to stay in contact with, you know, in visual contact with the shore.
So 2 more questions before we wrap up. What happened to the shipwreck once you pulled it out of the water?
Yeah, I didn't have the time to go into this, but it went through a very long process of preservation here in the University of Haifa. This is very interesting. We actually didn't have the knowledge, so people from University of Haifa were sent to Denmark, to one of the Viking museums, and then they learned how to preserve the wood. And so there were special labs that were established here in the University of Haifa to work with the wood. Actually, in a nutshell, the process is replacing the water inside the wood with artificial wax. And this was a long process that took up to 4 or 5 years. And only then the wood hardened and they were able to put all the pieces together like a 3-dimensional puzzle and to come up with what you see behind me.
The last question was, did Caesarea ever fulfill the role of a port like Herod had intended it?
Well, we have here actually in the University of Haifa, we have a scholar who's investigating the reasons why the Herod's port actually stopped being operational. And one of the interesting theories is that it suffered from a major tsunami. As far as we know, it was operative to about 150 years or so. It was, you know, it was top of the line. Caesarea doesn't have a natural harbor, so what Herod did, he was using special cement walls that were sank in the water to create an artificial harbor. So it was top of the line. It did serve for a while. It was on the route of grain from Egypt. Egypt was the granary supplying the grain to Rome. So it was on that route, and it did serve as an important port, but unfortunately for a relatively short period.
Amir, this was wonderful. Thank you very much. We did receive one last question, which I'll just comment on before we leave, about the economic importance of the archaeology, the science of archaeology to the state of Israel. And obviously, it is a foundation of the entire tourism industry. So if we ever get over coronavirus and we can all come visit, hopefully many of these archaeological finds will be part of that. And I just want to make the comment that Israel had record tourism before the coronavirus, more than 4 million visitors. And archaeology is obviously very much at the core of that, many other things, but archaeology as well. But Rome last year had 40 million visitors. So I think there's still plenty of opportunity for the archaeological record and story to be told to the broader world and to magnify that economic impact for the state of Israel. Thank you. We want to thank the American Society of the University of Haifa for this series, for allowing us to showcase them and the tremendous work that's going on at the University of Haifa. And next week, we're going to bring it from the ancient world to the modern world when we talk with Benjamin Ben-Tal, an economics professor from the University of Haifa, about the economy of the state of Israel. Amir Wilensky, thank you. You are also a treasure, as well as the Hecht Museum. And we very much appreciate you sharing your time and expertise with us today.
Toda rabah.
All right, everybody, thank you. Hopefully we'll see you all next week.
Thank you very much.